Welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlotte. I'm Ward Simmons. I'm one of your Dharma leaders. I used to say I'm one of your 5 Dharma leaders, but now I have to say I'm one of your 7 Dharma leaders now that Larry and Thea have joined us. So this evening I want to speak about generosity. Why, you may ask? We're here to practice and hear about meditation. Isn't a talk on generosity out of place? So many folks who are new to Insight Meditation aren't aware of the central role that generosity plays in this pathway to awakening. The fact is that before the Buddha taught meditation to anyone, he would first teach generosity. And that was so as to properly prepare the hearts and minds of his listeners. Pali was the language spoken during the time of the Buddha, and the Pali word, dana, is usually translated as generosity. And if you've been attending our Sangha or any other insight meditation activities, you're probably familiar with that term. In fact, dana can be understood at least 2 different ways, probably more. The first is dana as an act of generosity, a specific action that we undertake. So we give a gift, and that's the practice of dana. But secondly, it's a mind state. It's a way of being in the world. So we cultivate a generous heart, and this becomes our de facto mode of operation. So this might be the most important thing I say all evening. While the first meaning of dana, that is individual acts of generosity, while that's important, the second meaning is by far the most impactful. At times, we might find it challenging to practice individual acts of generosity. And this is because our work of cultivating a generous heart is not yet complete. But as we strengthen our generous heart, individual acts of generosity flow naturally, effortlessly, and the challenge of being generous begins to dissipate. Sharon Salzberg, many of y'all know her, a respected insight meditation teacher, says, "The preeminent aim of dana is to free ourselves from the conditioned internal forces of craving, clinging, and attachment that bind, that bind and limit us all." So think about that. The preeminent aim of dana is not supporting worthy nonprofits, and it's not helping the needy. It is freeing ourselves from clinging. How about that? So note the inward focus there. It's about our condition and our relationship. Now, if you're familiar with the Buddhist teachings, you will know that one of the most fundamental ones, the 4 Noble Truths, is going to come into play here. So just to review, the first noble truth, there is dukkha, the Pali word for dissatisfaction or suffering in life. There is a cause of dukkha, and the cause is clinging or attachment. To the extent that we can release our clinging or attachment, there will be a corresponding reduction in our dukkha, and there is a path we can follow to cling or attach less, and that's the Noble Eightfold path. And that path includes, but is not limited to, meditation. So when we abandon our attachments, really, that's the practice of renunciation, renouncing our attachments. And this is at the core of the Four Noble Truths, and it's at the core of guess what else? Dana, or generosity, renouncing things we might be attached to. When we hear that the preeminent aim of Dana is to free ourselves from clinging, the connection between generosity and meditation practice begins to emerge. So one of the connections to the Buddhist teachings is the Four Noble Truths. So there's another teaching that is of the three poisons. Those are greed, hatred, and delusion. And the absence of these poisons, overcoming these poisons, is understood to be the key factor in reaching awakening. So if someone is an arhat, and they're understood to have awakened, there will be no trace of greed, hatred, or delusion present for them. I'm not speaking from personal experience. This is conventional wisdom as taught by the Buddha. In the suttas, we hear about the opposites of these three negative characteristics. They're phrased as non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion. Non-greed is understood to be, guess what? Generosity. Non-hatred is understood to be loving kindness, and non-delusion is understood to be wisdom or insight. So the notion of generosity is one of the three positive characteristics that are essential to eliminate the three unwholesome roots, which we have to eradicate on the way to awakening. Now, the Buddhist teachings are filled with references to generosity, but I'm just going to mention one more, and that is the paramis. So the 10 paramis, or perfections, there's a collection of 10 wholesome traits that one is to cultivate on this path. And let me just name them. Some of you will be familiar with them. Generosity, ethical behavior, renunciation, discernment, effort, patience, truthfulness, determination, loving kindness, and equanimity. And you may have noticed that the first of the 10 is generosity. And this is consistent with the Buddha's teaching of generosity first. It prepares the listener's heart and mind. An often quoted sutta of the Buddha's, I want to share with you. He stated, if beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of miserliness overcome their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared, if there were someone to receive the gift. So again, notice here, the focus is not on the benefit to the other person who's being shared with. Instead, the emphasis is on the giver eliminating what he refers to as the stain of miserliness. So let's talk for a moment about intention and generosity. There are many motives for generosity. Sometimes they're selfish, oftentimes they're mixed, and occasionally they're pure. So a wealthy businesswoman might make a gift to her alma mater with the agreement that her name will be placed on a building. And her expectation is that this will enhance her business. In the context of generosity, this is a gift with a selfish motive. While it may benefit the school, the benefit of practicing Dana will not accrue to the woman who made this gift. So many of our motives are a mixture of selflessness and selfishness. And while this is not as desirable as a purely selfless act, an act of Dana with mixed motives may still be the best that we can muster at this stage in our development or at this moment in our lives. Even with mixed motives, some benefit will accrue to the giver, and certainly the receiver will benefit. So an example of this might be, I decide to clean out my garage, and I don't do it because I feel generous. I do it because I need the space. It may be more trouble for me to organize and deliver these items to charity than to just throw them in the trash. So there is some measure of wholesome intention, but that really wasn't the driving force. Then there are the purely selfless acts of generosity. We give because we are inspired. Few or no people will know who made the gift. There's no recognition to be gained. There's no benefit to the giver except the joy of giving and reinforcing the habit of relinquishment. As with so many of the Buddha's teachings, when we cultivate a heart of generosity, we are swimming against the stream. Sometimes givers feel embarrassed by recognition of their acts of generosity. And I kind of suspect this arises from our cultural norm, which is that everybody gives for recognition. I mean, that's the norm. And when our generosity is pure, we can feel genuine happiness in our actions and the results, and we don't have to feel embarrassed about it. The Buddha taught that when practiced correctly, dana should bring the giver joy when one contemplates in advance the gift one is going to make, in the moment of engaging in the act of giving, and later when recalling the act of generosity. So clearly, generosity is intended to be a source of joy. So let's say you're convinced of the value of practicing dana. You may be saying, all right, where do I begin? And here are a few thoughts. And before I offer these, let me just say, we all know about generosity in one context or another. This is not new to any of us. We all have a relationship to generosity. But what I'm focusing on here is in the context of the Dharma. Maybe there'll be something here that'll be a little different take on it, or a piece of information about the way the Buddha taught it that you hadn't understood. So first, when we hear the term generosity, we unconsciously associate it with monetary gifts. And while money is one way of giving, it's not the only way. We can give our time and attention. For example, we can serve as a caregiver for a loved one, or we can volunteer for an organization that we care about. We can resolve situations in favor of the other person. So let's say that we arrive in a waiting line at the same time as somebody else. We can just slow down a little bit and let them go first. Just give them the gift of getting ahead of us in line. In traffic, we can relinquish to the other driver our right to that space in front of us, between us and the car ahead of us, when it's clear that this other driver is determined to squeeze in. Instead of blowing the horn, we can slow down and make space for them. We can practice generosity by giving another the benefit of the doubt, assuming they have the best motives. And that's until and unless we learn something to the contrary. So as you work to develop your generosity practice in the context of the Dharma, understand the context, understand the concept of generosity in an expansive concept. So in the context of the Dharma, one of the highest acts of generosity is observing the 5 lay precepts. And they are not harming living creatures, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not engaging in incorrect speech, and not becoming intoxicated. When we follow these lay precepts, it gives the gift of protecting all living beings from the harm that our own unskillful actions might have caused. Another thing to keep in mind is to remember that you're cultivating a habit. Particularly in the beginning, there will be a lot of starting over. So don't be demoralized when you fall short. The experiences you have falling short are the fuel that will strengthen your determination the next time. So several years ago, a friend of mine shared with me her distress at a situation she found herself in. In a casual conversation with a person next to her on an airplane, she was asked about her husband, and she was uncomfortable responding that her relationship partner was a woman. So she lied and she pretended that she had a husband. And afterwards, she told me how humiliated she felt, here a grown woman lying to someone else over their perceived expectations. She doesn't even know whether the person would have been receptive to that or not. She just assumed that. She told me that she had committed herself to never do that again, but she still felt a lot of guilt and shame about it. And what I pointed out to her was that that encounter really just strengthened her commitment to honesty, and this will bear wholesome fruit in a future situation. There's no reason to feel shame. Simply use the experience to make a better choice the next time. And so it is with Dharma. Maybe we look back on our Dharma and we think, gosh, I gave too little. Or maybe we look back and think, I think I gave too much. This is the next step in our discernment process, and it will produce a benefit. In the spirit of being generous to ourselves, which is part of the equation, we don't beat ourselves up over it. The particular instance matters far less than the benefit we derive from refining our understanding of Dharma. So another tool as we work with this is to slow down and pay careful attention. Maybe the word mindfulness comes to mind here. When we're in a situation where we're conflicted about an act of generosity. How much of a disaster would it be if you permit yourself to experiment by being generous outside of your comfort zone? Is there a fear of scarcity that's not really based in reality? Could you pause and reframe the situation in the context of abundance, where there may be enough to be generous and still have enough left for you? What does it feel like to simultaneously have a pull to be generous and resistance to that generosity, both in the same moment? Where do you feel that in your body? What, if anything, does it remind you of from your past? After the situation is over, reflect on the choice you made. What can you learn to inform your developing spirit of generosity? The Buddha understood that everyone's situation is unique, that it changes throughout our lifetimes, and that some are able to give more than others. He didn't use his position of influence to encourage unwise giving, the way we've seen some spiritual teachers do. You don't have to give away everything you own to follow these teachings. He recognized that householders, lay people like us, have financial responsibilities. We have families, we have businesses, and he encouraged householders to be prudent in their giving so that their ability to meet their other responsibilities wasn't compromised. Now, a related matter is when there's an effort to coerce giving. So while the recipient of the gift may derive benefit from a coerced gift, the impact on the giver is not in the spirit of Dharma. And this is a difficult topic, I gotta say. And it's in evidence in our insight meditation tradition every day. So the practice originated in the East, and the teachings were simply offered for free, trusting that those who were touched by them would be inspired to support them in their continued dissemination. And this trust was supported by a long-standing culture in the East of giving support to spiritual practitioners. But when the practice migrated to the West, it was not clear that these fledgling retreat centers and sanghas could rely on people to respond in this way. The concept of pure selfless giving was not prevalent in our culture. Some more active effort was determined to be needed if the teachings were to have the opportunity to survive and take hold. And so now most retreat centers and sanghas offer Dharma talks, wherein they share the concept of Dharma and invite or encourage people to contribute. There are also respected teachers in the insight meditation tradition who see it differently, who believe this is a bastardization of the concept of Dharma, that any request for Dharma has already crossed the line and tainted the giver's opportunity for a selfless gift. Thanissaro Bhikkhu discusses this at length in his excellent article, No Strings Attached, The Buddha's Culture of Generosity. And I want to share one excerpt with you. I don't like to use quotes that are too long, but this is about 12 sentences long, so just stay with me for a minute or two. He says, "How can I ever repay you for your teaching?" Good meditation teachers often hear this question from their students, and the best answer I know for it is one that my teacher, Ajahn Vuong, gave every time: by being intent on practicing. Each time he gave this answer, I was struck by how noble and gracious it was. And it wasn't just a formality. He never tried to find opportunities to pressure his students for donations. Even when our monastery was poor, he never acted poor, never tried to take advantage of their gratitude and trust. I was saddened when on my return to America, I had my first encounters with the Dharma talk, the talk on giving and generosity that often comes at the end of a retreat. If you've been on a residential meditation retreat, you've heard that talk. The context of the talk, and often the content, makes clear that it is not a disinterested exercise. It is aimed at generating gifts for the teacher or the organization sponsoring the retreat, and it places the burden of responsibility on the retreatants to ensure that future retreats can occur. The language of the talk is often smooth and encouraging, but when contrasted with Ajahn Vuong's answer, I found the sheer fact of the talk ill-mannered and demeaning. If the organizers and teachers really trusted the retreatants' good-heartedness, they wouldn't be giving a talk at all. So let me be quick to say that I have given Dharma talks in the past, and I have not always struck what I consider to be the correct balance on this point. It's not my intention to provide the answer tonight on this issue. Rather, my intention is to invite you to engage with it for yourself. That is the essential nature of Dharma, engagement in an active discernment process. I have a friend who several years ago asked me repeatedly what amount of Dharma she should give. "Just tell me how much and I'll give it," she would say. But for me to do so would circumvent the true purpose of Dharma, for the giver to engage in a discernment process. it would have been to mislead her into believing she had practiced dana when she had not. So in closing, I just want to review a few of the essential points that we've covered tonight. The practice of dana is essentially that of cultivating a generous heart. And when we do this, acts of generosity naturally follow. Generosity pervades the Buddhist teachings, including renunciation and the Four Noble Truths, the cultivation of non-greed as an antidote to one of the three poisons, and as the first of the 10 paramids. Intention is central to our generosity, and many times we will act with mixed intentions as we progress on this path. Use those experiences to learn from and build upon, not to induce guilt. Generosity encompasses much more than gifts of money. One of the highest forms being adhering to the 5 lay precepts. Mindfully observe your experience when issues come up for you when you are practicing dana, and then reflect on the experience afterwards. And finally, set appropriate boundaries around generosity, just as you would around any other matter in your life. So I hope those thoughts on generosity are useful, and we have a little time for comments or questions. If you would like to pose a question or share a comment, you can do it one of two ways. If you know how to use the Zoom raise your hand function, that's an electronic function, it's not this. You may do that, or if you want to, you can chat in your question or comment. And I think I will go ahead and do the announcements now as people are organizing their thoughts for comments or questions. So our noon Tuesday sits have resumed on Zoom, and there's a Zoom link on the website. Yay. A little tiny step toward returning to normalcy. The book discussion group with begins on May 6th and it goes through July 1st. The book is Mindfully Facing Disease and Death, and Joy and Larry will be leading this. Clean Up Charlotte is an event that'll be held at Freedom Park on May 8th. That's this Saturday from 9 to 12 in the morning. David Chernikoff will be our guest leader on Wednesday night, May 19th, and then also leading a day-long retreat on May 22nd. You can register for the day-long on the website, and registration is required. On June 16th, Mary Aubrey will be our guest leader. Registration for the IMC Charlotte Summer Residential Retreat, August 19th through the 22nd, is now open. The last Wednesday of each month, there is a Zoom live instruction session, which will be from 7 to 7:30. If you're relatively new, or if you'd like a refresher of the basic instructions, that's an opportunity for that. The first Wednesday of each month, which happened tonight, there is the practice discussion group from 6:45 to 7:30. That's an opportunity for folks with an established practice to be with a teacher in a more intimate setting and ask questions about practice. We want to make sure to thank all of the volunteers who make this possible. They're invisible to most of us, but it's a substantial commitment. It's a substantial act of dana, of service. And so we bow to those people. All of the details on what I've announced are on the IMC Charlotte website. And speaking of dana, if you would like to practice dana toward this organization by a contribution of money, the website is the way you do that. Okay. So looks like so here's a comment. I think Westerners live in a place where we are usually stuck when told to decide how much. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a very peculiar situation for us, and it's awkward. You know, it makes us all uncomfortable. It's not what we want. We just want to know what it will pay it if you'll just tell us. But it's not about the money. It's about the discernment. And one teacher, Rodney Smith, once said when he was talking about dana, he said, an amount, the question of how much specifically, he said an amount that you won't look back on later and think was too little, an amount that you won't look back on later and think was too much. It's not as good as a dollar amount, but it helped me. Okay. I don't see, let's see, here's a hand up. This looks like Angela.
Hi, Ward. Thank you for the talk.
Hey.
So I was so excited when you started talking about generosity, because I've been talking about this almost all week and with my partner today. And so I wanted to kind of formulate a question here, because I don't really know how or what I'm trying to ask, but I've recently been doing a lot of research about codependency and this sort of expectation that we fall into when we give, like that we want something back. Yeah, so I'm just thinking through all the points of your talk, right? And how do we kind of train the mind? And this also has to do with like codependency, right? Like if you're always like looking for validation from someone or something, like how do you sort of reset your thinking around giving? Like if you're going to give, let it be unconditional with no expectation back. I don't know. Like I said, I don't really know how to formulate my question, but this is just something that I'm struggling with. Maybe others are resonating with that too. And maybe you can just comment candidly, like how you might advise me in that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I understand.
Thank you.
So I'll share my thoughts. I have not perfected that. So, you know, we live in a culture where it's an exchange culture. You give me that and I give you this. And it's really foreign and peculiar to us. I don't mean to say nobody's doing it, but it's not the norm to just gush generosity without thinking about what might come back our way. How do we get there? How do we move from here to there? I think one thing is careful attention, mindfully noticing every, as many as you can, every engagement with generosity. What are the overtones? What are the undertones? What questions does it bring up for us? I think it's just a matter of investigation. And the answer for me, my issues around generosity might be very different from the next person's. So it's not so easy to give a boilerplate answer because we all behave differently in the context of generosity based on our upbringing and our experiences. I think paying careful attention, you know, if if you've got a decision to make about generosity coming up and you're unsure about it, you can use your meditation practice to do an inquiry. Now, this is not conventional insight meditation, so don't confuse this with formal meditation practice, but there's nothing wrong with sitting down for 30 minutes and holding a specific question in front of you and holding it very lightly, dropping it in when you begin your meditation, and not noodling through it, not actively thinking about it, but then maybe periodically during the meditation, just revisit the question and see if anything comes up for you. Sometimes that can be a technique to gain some insight. There are a lot of good talks on generosity, recorded Dharma talks that if you go to Dharma Seed and you, for the topic, if you put in generosity, you can find a lot of good talks. I'm afraid the short answer is we got to noodle through it on our own. So anyway, I don't know if that helps, but those are my thoughts. So, thanks for asking. Okay, we've all mastered generosity. What a relief. Denise, I see a hand up. Whoops. Okay. So Denise, you ought to be able to unmute now. All right, let's try that.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I don't have a question, but I had two announcements that I wanted to make. We have a couple of announcements also in the chat bar for folks. One regarding Chernikov, who's excellent, and I can't believe how quickly this is coming up. So if you plan to join us all on that Saturday, if you can go ahead and register, that would be great. Also, the online registration for the retreat, if you just put the word retreat in the search bar, that'll get you to the registration form. I wanted to promote or ask if anyone would like to express Dharma in this way in volunteering. We are in need of some volunteers for our programs committee, which helps us with bringing guest leaders and speakers such as Chernikov. And also our communications committee, which helps us with getting the word out on everything. And then also our finance committee. So if you are fiscally wise and would like to contribute, we'd love to be able to talk to you. So you can contact myself if you'd like on the board, under board IMCC Charlotte. You'll see it on the website there. The other thing, I wanted to kind of give a loose update on this because as we know, everything's uncertain with COVID, but you've all been hanging in for a long time now and been very patient, but we are hoping to return to in-person in a hybrid model, actually, August 1st back at the chapel, and then hopefully be able to Zoom out for those who would still like to join from outside. Some of our folks aren't even in Charlotte here, so it would be great to have you, and we will keep you up to date. That will all be following COVID guidelines, whatever they are at that time. We will be on top of that. So it'd be nice to see everybody, but I just wanted to give you a little update so you're not in the dark on this.
Okay, so there's one other question, one other comment. I've found that meditating on a question often helps me with codependency types of obstacles that I come across. So that's another person's observation. That is Julia's observation. Thank you, Julia. Okay, seems like that question and comment period is reached a natural close, and we will close our session tonight with metta or loving kindness practice. So if you want to find a posture that's comfortable for a few minutes. So I will offer phrases that you can repeat silently to yourself. Before we begin, if there's any being or beings that you'd like to have held in loving kindness, we would normally say those names out loud, but just say those names to yourself, and we will include them. May I be safe from inner and outer harm. May I be happy and content. May I be healthy in body and mind. And may I live a life of well-being, free from suffering. Then turning our attention to another being or beings that we'd like to hold in loving kindness tonight. And here we'll include any of those people identified a few moments ago. May you be safe from inner and outer harm. May you be happy and content. May you be healthy in body and mind. And may you live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And finally, broadening out our metta or loving kindness practice to all beings everywhere. May all beings be safe from inner and outer harm. May all beings be happy and content. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. May all beings, without exception, live lives of well-being, free from suffering.